one answering present. The bill is passed. But today wouldn't be possible without the leadership of arguably the most powerful and the most successful and the most respected president in the modern era of the United States.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
With House Republicans advancing a multi-trillion-dollar tax and spending package in the middle of the night, because nothing says, hey, we're not going to pass a bill that has sweeping impacts on household finances and seeks to gut Medicare and Medicaid like voting for it at 3 a.m.
This bill dramatically increases deficits in the near term, but promises our government will be fiscally responsible 5 years from now. Where have we heard that before? Mr. Speaker, we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg. If something is beautiful, you don't do it after midnight.
If enacted, the legislation called the, quote, One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which, countless Republicans insisted in the past is not beautiful at all.
Acceptable.
Can you see yourself voting for this big, beautiful bill at all?
Not in the current structure, no. Yeah, I refuse to vote for something that's going to actually increase the deficits, exacerbate the problem from the current situation. Again, we shouldn't be talking about this right now. We should have been doing all the work. Like I say, multi-step process. We'd already have the border funding. We'd have defense. We'd have $850 billion of real savings banked already. Plus, we could have extended current tax law, taken tax rate increase off the table. We could have had all that done, but unfortunately, decisions were made to do one big, beautiful bill. It's not beautiful. I'm sorry. It's not a big, beautiful bill.
Could make permanent President Donald Trump's 2017 tax cuts while adding new provisions that could significantly overhaul student borrowing, healthcare, savings accounts, among other changes. But it also drew quite a response from former President Barack Obama, who took to Twitter to vehemently oppose the bill, stating, quote, right now Republicans in Congress are trying to push through a bill that would put millions of Americans at risk of losing their health care. They want to cut federal funding for Medicaid, take away tax credits that help more people afford coverage, and raise costs for working class families. He went on to say that means some of the most vulnerable Americans, families, the elderly, folks with disabilities, won't be able to get the life-saving treatment, medication, or care that they need.
Why do we oppose this bill? It represents the largest cut to Medicaid in American history. Take away health care from millions of people. Families will be hurt. Children will be hurt. Women will be hurt. Everyday Americans with disabilities will be hurt. Hospitals will close. Nursing homes will shut down. People will die. The largest cut to health care in American history. And on top of that, the largest cut to nutritional assistance in American history. They literally, these extremists want to take food out of the mouths of children, veterans, and older Americans. And they're doing all of this to enact the largest tax break for billionaires.
Now, this comes at a crucial time. As we know, with control of Congress, Republicans can use, quote, budget reconciliation to pass the package, which only really needs a simple majority in the Senate. The bill, which is more than 1,000 pages long, is likely to see changes in the upper chamber before Donald Trump signs it into law. Now, to give a little bit more insight into what's actually in this dense package, the thing that Republicans were still making excuses as to language mere hours before it was to be voted on.
I would also say, the way that you have written it, as you've noted, it's retroactive, right? So this applies to any...
I just want to say the situation we're trying to address is what's been happening around the country.
You didn't write it that way.
As you know, a single federal judge gets cases brought to the judge. They waive the security and then issue a decision that applies nationwide to all immigrants who are in that
Why
situation.
didn't you put nationwide in this language?
Well, we can look at the language. I mean,
it's 6 a.m. You're voting on this thing in like 10 hours. What are we talking about?
Well, here's MSNBC contributor and former Treasury official Steve Ratner, who broke down just who is set to benefit from it. I'll give you a wee hint. It's not the other 99%.
Let's turn now to former Treasury official and Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Ratner. He's got charts on the potential impact of this huge legislation. Steve, good morning. So let's talk about the deficit and what this House bill, if it does make its way through, if the Senate, which has said it's not going to vote, many Republicans for this, it's just too big. But if it does go through, what would it do to the deficit?
Yeah, as you can imagine, given what Ali just went through and all the lists of things that they're doing, the impact on the deficit is pretty significant. Let's just put some numbers on some of the cuts. First, the extension of the personal income tax reductions that were made during the 2017 bill and are set to expire at the end of this year, $2.2 trillion over 10 years, raising the standard deduction, $1.3 trillion, the child tax credit, $800 billion. And then you get into Trump's campaign promises, no tax on overtime, car loans, interest and tips, $200 billion, increasing defense spending. This is his attempt to take Social Security taxes away from seniors so they don't have to pay them by giving them a special deduction. And then you get into the cuts, the student loan changes, the climate funds, and Medicaid, $700 billion of Medicaid cuts. So what does that do to the deficit? Here is the baseline deficit. So even without this tax bill, the deficit was essentially going to keep going up over the next 10 years, maybe come down a little bit at the very end, but essentially up. Then you add in the tax bill that we just talked about, including the fact that they've played the same gimmick they played in 2017, setting up some of these things to expire. And that would make the deficit impact higher, but not as high as if you made all this stuff permanent. The record of Congress, stuff almost always gets made permanent. And so somewhere along in here, they will make this permanent and we'll end up on this line. And this line is something like $25 trillion of additional debt. Now, I do want to say that the other thing that happened yesterday, not as visible and consequential as these House votes, is the fact that the Treasury yields went up very, very sharply yesterday. The Treasury sold some 20-year debt. It didn't go well. The 30-year Treasury bond is now above 5%. What does that mean? That couldn't, well, it means higher rates for mortgage originators and things like that. But what it also means is potentially the bond market starting to say potentially $25 trillion of new debt over the next 10 years is more than we can absorb comfortably.
Yeah, Steve, it can't be overstated the importance of the bond market potentially weighing in here. Let's turn to your second chart with the headline simple but stark and telling. Tax cuts for the wealthy, spending cuts for the poor.
Yeah, Ali alluded to this as well, but let's put some numbers on this. If you're in the top 20% of Americans, you're going to get roughly a 3.7% increase in your after-tax income, really all from these tax cuts. But if you go all the way to the bottom and everything in between essentially leads you to the bottom, if you're in the bottom 20%, you actually lose $800. Why do you lose $800? You get a very small tax cut and you get a very large cut in Medicaid and these other benefits that we were just talking about that affects the 20% disproportionately. So this is a highly regressive bill that essentially favors the wealthy, doesn't do much for the middle class, and hurts the poor. And then if you want to see this in stark comparison, if we simply eliminated the tax cuts for people making over $500,000 a year, which is roughly what President Biden was proposing, it would save $1.1 trillion. That happens to be just slightly more than the Medicaid cuts and the food stamps or SNAP cuts, if you will, put together. So if we simply eliminated these tax cuts, we could eliminate these budget cuts on these poor people and end up, from a budget point of view, in the same place.
And Steve, let's turn to your third chart there. Tell us about the impact that this bill would leave on those with insurance.
Yeah. So again, as Ali alluded to, the budget cuts Medicaid in a variety of different ways. Some of it gets complicated. I'm not going to get into all the details, but the biggest piece of it is the work requirements, requiring people to, I think, work 80 hours or perform 80 hours of community service at least a month. Things like Ali mentioned, also checking Medicaid eligibility more frequently. is making it more difficult for the states to get the Medicaid funds they're getting now, and then some Biden-era rules that made it easier to sign up for Medicaid, repealing those, so it becomes harder to sign up for Medicaid. So what does that mean? As Ali said, the estimates are 8.6 million Americans losing their health insurance. And what's interesting about this chart is if you go back over here, before Obamacare went into effect, when we had over 45 million uninsured Americans, it went down, 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 down. In here was Trump 1.0 with his first effort to impose work requirements on Medicaid recipients. So some people became uninsured. Down, down, down again. And now we're looking at taking it back up here and essentially reversing something like 10 years of progress in having fewer and fewer Americans without medical coverage.
Love this video? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch and help us blow past 1 million followers.